Hi, I'm Jeff Van Gundy, and you're listening to Thunderbus.
Welcome to Thunderbus with your hosts Watson and Bones.
I'm Watson.
And I'm Bones.
We get serious about the thunder on this motherfucking podcast.
But we don't get too serious, baby.
Bones?
Yeah, what's in the goblet?
There's not much to talk about in the NBA right now, so we're going to do another questions pod.
Yeah, part 2, where we answer questions from noobs. But we still love you.
And a noob, in case you're not a member of the gaming community, means non-basketball fan.
Yeah, just, it's one who does not dive in. It's just a noob. I mean, there's not much else to say.
These are questions from Joe Schmoes that we knows, and they don't knows the answers to these questions because they are not basketball fans. So they asked us these off the wall inquiries.
Yep, and you wanted the answers. That's why you clicked play.
And we'll see if we can satisfy your desire for cogent content with the bullshit we're about to unleash. So, first question.
Yeah, go for it.
This person says, give a brief explanation about the different positions like forward, center, etc. Yes, we know what the positions are. What is each position responsible for? How are they used strategically? Another etc. This person likes etceteras.
It's a beautiful word.
I imagine they might at some point make a list where they say things like etc., etc., etc.
My favorite actress is Carmen etc. Did you hear about Carmen etc. and Dennis Rodman?
Yes. They argued about Latin phrases.
I was about to interrupt you because I haven't seen the last episodes of The Last Dance. So if there's like a big Carmen Electra plot line, I just didn't want it to be spoiled.
Hey man, it's all about Latin phrases. Dennis Rodman wanted to know what e pluribus unum meant, and he said, "What's a quid pro quo?" So we got kind of political there for a bit.
Pretty abstract for ESPN, and it's not really what the people wanted. And I gotta say, I'm not excited to watch that.
Yeah, it's a good thing they saved it for the last week.
That sounds bad.
So, brief explanation of the different positions. Traditionally, there are 5 positions in basketball, and they're kind of arranged according to size, basically. So, there are 5 players on the floor at each time, and the positions are point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center.
Mm-hmm.
And those positions also have numerical designations. So the point guard is considered the one or the one man.
Mm-hmm.
The shooting guard is the 2 man. Small forward is the 3. Power forward is the 4. Center is the 5. And that is in ascending order according to height / overall size, generally speaking.
Minus some outliers.
So the point guard, traditionally, his role is to be kind of the floor general, if you will. He dribbles the ball. He's typically the one with the best ball handling skills. It's hard to get the ball up and down the court against defenses. It takes a lot of energy. So that's been the point guard's role through most of the history of the game. The shooting guard traditionally is also a skilled, smaller player whose job it is to get a lot of shots up. Shooting guards historically have been high scorers. People like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan were shooting guards. Small forwards are kind of tweeners between like the skilled guards and the large, hulking big men. They would slash the basket, make cuts, but they also have enough size that they can, guard up a position. Power forwards, usually, around 6'9", 6'10", classically in the NBA, And they're big men, but they're not the biggest men. But they help out with the rebounds, typically in the paint. And then centers are going to be the biggest guys on the floor. And throughout a lot of basketball's history, centers were the focal point of offenses frequently. So like Shaquille O'Neal is a center. David Robinson was a center. So those are kind of like the classic roles. But the thing is that all of the traditions about basketball positions have been kind of going out of style over the last few decades, and especially over the past few years, because now there are point guards that are looking to score all the time, like Russell Westbrook.
Yeah. And there are also players that you might consider a point guard right now that were at one time just a shooting guard.
Right.
Yeah. That they went from a 2 to a 1.
There's really been a blurring of positions, and now like there's kind of like a large group of just guards, of just highly skilled players that handle the ball a lot, are just kind of a group of guards basically. The designation between point guard and shooting guard doesn't mean as much as it used to. And the big hulking center is very much going out of vogue because guys of that size can't move laterally very quickly,
right?
Which makes them a liability on defense when they have to cover a lot of space. And teams today are making them guard a lot of space.
It says a lot about today's game now that both point guards and centers have the green light in a lot of occasions to shoot the three ball. But 25 years ago, that wasn't the case for both positions. You wanted the shooting guard. You really just wanted the shooting guard to take the three. But now, if you are on the floor, most of the time you're expected to shoot the three.
And with that, you're getting into the question, the part of the question where they say, how are they used strategically?
Yeah.
It used to be that only the guards really would shoot from distance, but now it's becoming increasingly a requirement of all these positions that they shoot the ball well, and that they generally have skills, whether it's passing or dribbling the ball.
Not so specialized.
Not nearly so specialized. But generally speaking, you want this is still true across basketball. You want the bigger players to be near to the hoop on defense because they're harder to shoot over. You want them to be the ones who are going after rebounds, and you want them to be the ones who are setting picks to create separation for offensive players from the players who are defending them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still true. You got anything else to add to this question?
No. I think you answered it. Well done, by the way. I was gonna.
Sorry for the TED talk there.
No, I thought. Yeah, there's 5 positions you got to cover. So hey, man, you got about 5 minutes. Minute per position.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I was gonna ask you maybe to list some like famous players for each position, but you kind of did it along the way. So yeah. Good answer.
Yeah, I didn't do that completely. I should have like small forward. LeBron James, Larry Bird were small forwards. Tim Duncan, Charles Barkley. Those are power forwards.
Yeah, and then I think you talked about all the other positions.
Yeah,
MJ, Westbrook, Shaq. But speaking of Shaq, let's move on to the next question. Why isn't every player good at making free throws? Considering how basic of a move free throws are, shouldn't they always make buckets? What's the average make-it rate of free throws? And now I wish that I would have looked that last question up. What's the average make-it rate of free throws?
It's 75%.
Ooh, there we go.
In the NBA.
This is why we got 2 on a pod. Hey, 2 bros in a pod.
It takes 2 to Yola Tango.
Oh, autumn sweater. That's what you're wearing right now. It's a Yola Tango song. Anyways, why isn't every player good at making free throws? Well, I think the simplest explanation is that the players that are best at shooting the free throw worked on that shot or a shot similar all of their lives. I think it's something they worked on when they were young, and it translated with age and they stayed good. And I think that's the kind of like the general answer. But then you have players who shoot well, like LeBron James. And LeBron is one of the best mid-range players of all time.
So we kind of get into this in the interview we did with Max Hooper, who is a staffer for the Lakers, and he is a shooting expert. And
yeah,
he's basically the de facto shooting coach for the Lakers. We talked about free throw shooting on that podcast, so I would recommend going back and listening to the Max Hooper episode. But just to give an answer here, they are kind of a basic movement, but there is a lot going on. Firstly, it's 15 feet from the free throw line to the hoop, which is kind of a long distance. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. If you're off by a couple degrees, you miss the shot.
Mm-hmm.
If you're off by, a foot in either direction, you miss the shot. So you do have to have a certain amount of accuracy. You're right that players practice a lot, but also there's a difference in how they perform in games versus how they perform in practice. Shaquille O'Neal, a notoriously poor foul shooter. I think he has the NBA record for most missed free throws with like 5,500, something ridiculous like that.
One of the worst.
But all the reporters say, all the journalists say that he would make 80% in practice.
For sure, and I believe that. I was going to mention that these players, they perform well in practice from the line. But I think like the Shaqs of the world who are doing 80 in practice and sucking in the game, clearly there's a mental block that's taking place. But I think that mental block is probably because that player didn't shoot that shot as much as the Steve Nashes of the world when they were younger. Shaq was always a big dude, so he was probably taking way more shots inside like 6 feet and not taking as many shots from the mid-range. And so I think that like if you're taking that shot from that distance, then you are getting muscle memory down as a young person, which makes it way easier to make the free throw.
That's true, but I feel like pretty much all these guys that make it to the NBA are playing from a time when they're kids. And when you're learning to play basketball, every single basketball coach I've interacted with talks about how important free throws are. So I don't think there are guys who are growing up and not shooting free throws that take basketball seriously enough that they end up being NBA players.
But I'm not just talking about free throws. I'm just talking about getting comfortable with the mid-range shot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
So if you're a kid that's hooping all the time and you are comfortable with the mid-range shot, I just think you have a better chance of growing up to be a better free throw shooter than someone who isn't as comfortable but is still practicing their free throws through life. But I mean, I definitely agree. There is a mental element there, but
There's absolutely a mental element.
I'm theorizing here that a lot of the players who do well in practice from the line but struggle in games just aren't that great of shooters.
I'm kind of just thinking about this in real time, but like us saying, well, there's a mental aspect to it. I think that naturally raises the question of, aren't there mental aspects to other facets of the game as well?
Yes.
There are, but the thing is, when the ball is live, things are just happening, and you're reacting, whereas the free throw is the ball is dead, everyone's looking at you, and you decide when you shoot it. So there's all this, that's naturally a pressure injected situation, and you get all sorts of time to overthink things.
Right.
Which is why coaches tell kids growing up, tell players, get a routine and stick to it. They don't want you to be changing up your routine at the free throw line because you're just supposed to get up there and just like knock it out like you're folding laundry or something. But you'll see players like LeBron James is constantly tweaking his free throw routine because he's not satisfied with how he's doing. And that's probably actually a reason why he doesn't improve
Yep.
really. And then Russell Westbrook, which you mentioned, he was a very good free throw shooter for his entire career until they changed an NBA rule that made it so that you couldn't leave the free throw line in between foul shots and go all the way back to the back court, which he used to do.
Right.
So when they changed that rule, he wasn't able to complete the routine that he'd practiced his entire life. And then his free throw rate plummeted by like 15%.
It's funny because it's merely a theory that is why he struggles now, but I absolutely buy it. I totally buy that.
It's I think it's kind of the same thing that happens to kickers in football. It's a somewhat analogous situation. Like everyone's looking at you, and you just have to like do the thing.
Yeah.
But like you get this opportunity to think about it ahead of time, which can mess with your brain a little bit.
For sure.
Also, kickers tend to be weirdos.
Yeah, that's true. They're all juggalos.
So, next question. What keeps you interested every season? Bones?
What keeps Bones interested every season? Well, first and foremost, the Oklahoma City Thunder and their performance. And, I mean, I've been a pretty big NBA fan since about 2011. I mean, I'm still kind of a baby, relatively, but I have been watching the game for almost a decade, and the Thunder are always in the mix. And for a while there, they, were sort of expected to make it out of the West and be champions, possibly. And so that's why I watch every season for a long time, because I almost saw the gold in 2012, and I couldn't. And in 2011, seeing Dirk win it all like that, like I just wanted to see one of our players like just hoist it up. So that's really what kept me interested. And then along the way, I just grew sort of accustomed to the hobby, and I fell in love with the team and players of the team, and I love seeing them evolve, and I love the Thunder. Now, secondarily, the rest of the league, I sort of just get attached to players. I get a little starstruck. I love them like you love a character of a TV show that you relate with or you think is great, and so I love to turn it on and watch Kawhi Leonard play like a modern day Michael Jordan sometimes, or like LeBron James be the best player ever. You can always turn the TV on and watch greatness, and you just see a lot of cool dunks and buzzer beaters.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic answer, because a lot of it is the drama of it, like the narrative drama, but the narrative drama interests me because I know the parties involved.
Yep.
And I think that's something that the NBA is uniquely good at, because you see the players' faces all the time. You get a lot more of an NBA player's personality watching an NBA game than you do football. In football, you pretty much just know the quarterbacks.
They become your friends almost.
Yeah. Russell Westbrook is my friend.
Steven Adams is my friend. Dion Waiters is my friend.
And obviously, basketball is just an incredible sport to watch. I think that like probably a passive, like casual fan or non-fan, depending. You just turn on the TV and you see, okay, these dudes are like running around seemingly at random, doing athletic things, but there is a lot going on strategically. And basketball is an insanely dynamic game where the advantages and disadvantages are constantly shifting, and there is a lot of intelligence going on the floor that you don't realize until you tune into it and study it a little bit. And it's kind of like NASCAR chess, which feels like a completely stupid thing to say.
I'm sensing a rebrand.
NASCAR chess. Just because, like, if there's a pick and roll at the top of the floor, let's say you got healthy, in his prime, Derrick Rose running pick and roll 30 feet from the hoop. He could be at the rim in 1.5 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's so lightning quick. And the defense is scheming to prevent him from being able to do that. But if he beats their scheme, then players have to rotate over in such a way they stop him and take away the thing that they're forcing him to do in reaction to having been stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of thing is happening basically every second of every game. And I find it just completely mentally stimulating.
Oh, yeah.
On top of just like the raw, wow, that was a fucking awesome dunk.
Right.
It's both gourds for me.
Well, on top of the strategy, the game is continuously evolving. And so the best kind of play conducive to wins at this one point in time is going to get countered later on in the future. And it's like you don't really know what the counter is, but you know that the game will evolve. And so because the game keeps evolving, you're kind of just digging into like a bottomless bucket of information because the content doesn't stop. There's
that makes
different
me think of Fuddruckers because they got the bottomless steak fries. Oh wait, no, that's Red Robin.
Oh man,
Fuddruckers sucks.
Well, you gave him a plug.
Red Robin's better.
Man, and just a terrible name too, Fuddruckers.
Yeah,
you know what you're doing.
Hey, go Fudd yourself.
Yeah,
Elma Fudd.
Hey, silly rabbit. Wait, no, that's
Oh, you wascally rabbit. Where were we?
What was I saying? Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a bottomless bucket of information, and it never stops because the game evolves and it keeps evolving. But yeah, it's kind of just tacking on to you.
Also, the uniforms are cool.
The uniforms are dope, except the Thunders, unfortunately, because the Love's patch. And speaking of jerseys, the next question says, I don't understand the significance of the strips of black electrical tape that some players wear on their shirts. First of all, not a question.
Yeah, go take some English education classes, maybe.
Question mark 101, maybe? Question mark? Watson, I'm going to give this one to you.
So what I think they're asking about, because I've never seen somebody wear black electrical tape in a basketball game. I think what they're referring to is the black stripes that are across one side of the jersey, like near the shoulder. And that is something that is not worn all the time, but it's being worn. It is worn to memorialize someone who has died. So a lot of times it's just this. Just a team will do it. If they had like a legendary broadcaster that died or something like that, or like if someone on staff, like their mother died, just anyone who passed that has import to the team. They sometimes will memorialize them by adding a black strip on the jersey, just like wearing a black armband.
Uh-huh.
But in the NBA this season, they started having the entire league wear them because David Stern, who was until a few years ago the commissioner of the league, died in 2020. So that's what the black strips are for.
That was the first important death.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was before Kobe, if that's what you mean.
BK.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There you go.
So this question, this is pretty interesting. How does a player actually get into the NBA? There are so many people from far-flung places. Do they just jump online and submit an application? How does a 21-year-old Slovenian kid find himself in the NBA? I'm assuming that he's referring to Luka Doncic.
Yes.
Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah. Cool Hand Luka. That's a good one.
He's going to juke ya.
I'll attack this for a second, and then you can
Attack!
you can climb on top once it's dead. But
Gross.
yeah, so back in the 80s, the international game was pretty much non-existent and speaking of David Stern, started creeping in the
You
league.
mean international players weren't really playing in the NBA?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. International players weren't playing in the NBA in the 80s. Now, there were probably a few, but it just wasn't as big as it is today. But yeah, David Stern sort of implemented that around the early 90s, and you started seeing kind of like an influx. You started seeing more international players come into the game, and a lot of people attribute it to the Dream Team in '92 because they were just so famous that it's like they made a world. They went to Barcelona, but it was almost like they made a world tour because all of these countries that played them, the fans of the country or people from that country saw NBA players, and so that was a big deal. And then you get players like Dirk Nowitzki and Hakeem Olajuwon and Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker that are definitely on the scene between like the early 90s and like coming into the mid 2000s. So now the international game has America's attention. And so if someone is good enough and they're playing Euroball, then scouts from the NBA will have most likely seen them play. And they will let the prospective team know, and they might. And I mean, if they're good enough, they're going to get drafted high because the game has just been so globalized now. So at this point, because of the evolution of including international players in the league, if you are good enough, then eyes are on you.
Yeah. I think the kind of the base level answer to this question is just that the basketball is popular across the world. It's popular throughout Europe, and some places in Europe that it's especially popular are like Spain, Lithuania, and most of the countries of the former Yugoslavia, particularly like Croatia and Serbia.
Yes.
Produce a lot of players, but also like Slovenia. And then it's popular to an extent in Africa as well. You mentioned Hakeem Olajuwon; he's from Nigeria, and Pascal Siakam, who's an all-star with the Raptors. He's from Cameroon. Manute Bol was from Sudan. So yeah, they're just the game is popular across the world, and it's growing in popularity and in competency. So you mentioned the Dream Team. The Dream Team started in '92, and that was the first year that professional players were allowed to participate in the Olympics. Before then, it was only amateur players. So like America would send basically college all-star teams to the Olympics, and they always won. That is until 1988, the Americans lost for the first time, and that was kind of a watershed moment. That showed that the internationals had kind of caught up. And in like the mid to late 80s, you saw the first trickles of international players coming over to the NBA and being successful.
Don Trickles.
guys like Detlef Schrempf came over in 1985. He was probably the first one that was like pretty darn successful. And then there was Drazen Petrovic came over in 1989.
Rest in peace.
After being just a huge star in Europe. And then today, the league is like 25% European. As for how these players get discovered, I mean, Bones kind of nailed it. Just like they come up in their home country systems, and then the NBA is the ultimate destination if you're a good basketball player. The EuroLeague is good, but the EuroLeague compared to the NBA is kind of like MLS compared to the Bundesliga or Serie A or something like that. You would rather go to the next step up, get paid more money, get taken more seriously, play better competition.
It's cool for the Thunder because sometimes on the court you got Canadian SGA bringing up the ball and then passing it to German Dennis Schroeder, who gets a screen from New Zealander Steven Adams, and then kicks it out to Italian Danilo Gallinari, who might give a backdoor cut to Lou Dort,
who is Haitian Canadian.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'll throw this out there too. The NBA has scouts that are around the world, and sometimes they come up on just like random stuff. So I think this is pretty hilarious. There was an NBA scout in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 2000s, and he met a cop, a Bosnian cop who was just huge, and the scout said to him, "Do you have any sons who play basketball?" And the cop said, "Yeah," and his son turned out to be Yusuf Nurkic, who is now when healthy, is the starting center for the Trailblazers.
That's crazy. Also, one of my least favorite players, just because of his face.
It's a very punchable face.
Yeah. He looks like he's up to no good.
Okay, Bones. Next question. Stats. There seem to be a lot. Which are more meaningful and correlate with good players? ?
Okay, stats. So let me just go through the basic stats that are meaningful, and I'll start with points. Obviously a point, or you get 2 points from scoring a bucket, or you get 3 points from shooting a three-pointer. Now, points are important because a team with the most points wins the ballgame.
This isn't golf.
And so, points are probably the most important thing. But there are also rebounds, and there are also assists. Now, these are also important, and you could argue that these are the 3 most important stats because these are the most you will see, or these are the stats that will have the highest numbers attached to them.
Yeah, there's certainly the stats that get talked about the most. Like, kind of the classic way to summarize a player's production is to just rattle off his points, rebounds, and assists per game. But we've found recently that kind of an overfixation on just those raw numbers can be misleading, because if a player, if you have 2 players, player X and player Y, that both average 20 points, and I just tell you they both average 20 points, then you would have no way to know them apart. Like they would be equally good. But if player X scores those 20 points while taking 18 shots and player Y takes 25 shots to score the same amount, player X obviously better. So that's why we have what's called field goal percentage, which is just how many of the shots do you take? Go in. So that's an important stat.
Right.
Because it measures a player's efficiency. Pretty much every team in the NBA has a guy who averages 20 points or close to it because somebody has to take the shots.
Right.
Now,
and you could argue that at the end of the game, if someone scores 15 points, that you could say they still had a bad game if they shot 25%.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But you could also say that someone who shot 100% had a bad game as well.
If they did poorly in other areas, or if they didn't shoot shots they should have in order to avoid missing.
If someone like LeBron James goes 2 for 2, then most people, 99% of NBA fans, are going to say that's a bad game for LeBron. So all of these stats are contextual, and it's very important to watch the actual game to know what really is going on.
Right, because efficiency is very important, but so, as you say, is effectiveness. And a lot of times, a player who is very good he'll have to take on a certain burden for the team, whether that's on defense or offense, scoring or assisting. And because he has to do a lot, his efficiency will go down. But that doesn't mean that he's, if he's shooting 44% from the field and another player on the team is shooting 47%, he might be better than the player who's shooting 47%, but it's just he doesn't get to be as choosy with which shots he takes because he's a better player.
Right.
And the team needs that from him.
Yeah.
So to kind of answer the question more directly, I would say that your shooting efficiency stats, so that's field goal percentage, free throw percentage, and 3-point percentage, those are pretty important because they show how efficient of an offensive player you are. And then I would also say that that it's better to look at raw numbers like points, assists, and rebounds on a per 36-minute basis versus a per game basis. Because some guys play 42 minutes in a game, and other guys play 25.
Now, do you know how long per 36 has been around?
I don't know how long that's been a frequently cited statistic. But
I mean, I agree. I think that it's an important one.
And then a key downfall of stats is we really don't have good numbers for defense. It's incredibly hard to come up with a rating for how a player is doing on defense. Really, the main defensive stats we have are for blocks and steals.
Yep.
But there are lots of examples of guys, especially point guards, who might average 2 steals a game and be really bad defenders.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about Russ for a second, but
I was actually thinking of like Trae Young, but there are lots of guys like that. Iverson was one of those guys.
Right, who just doesn't have it together on defense, but knows when to make a big play when the opportunity presents itself.
Here's the fundamental difficulty of representing defense with statistics is if you're guarding a guy with the ball and he drives to the basket and you move your feet well and you get your chest in front of him and stop him and he has to turn around and pass the ball to a non-threat, what kind of stat do you put down for that?
Yeah. You got a good point. Maybe there should be another stat created or multiple created for defense to better accurately measure defense. Or do we just stop looking at stats so much?
Well, they have stats that they've come up with to try to answer questions like these. Like they have the ability now to track players' movements and their relative positions and who has the ball. So they have stats that measure like what is the field goal percentage of the person you're guarding when you're within 6 feet of them.
Okay.
And then they can compare that to that player's average. So you can see that someone might hold the average player to like 6 percentage points below their average. But there doesn't seem to be a consensus on, like, there are lots of different variants of these kinds of stats, and they have noise built into them because they're trying to triangulate this stuff in the data. So there's not really a consensus on which of these statistics are the best, which ones are reliable. So that's why it's very common to say in the quote-unquote analytics world that we just don't have that many great statistics for defense yet. We have things that sound good conceptually, but we haven't like decided, okay, these are the stats that work.
And what's interesting, if there are stats that work that kind of make it to the scene, will that change the game? You know, will that change how the game is coached, played, and even viewed? I think yes. But we don't know because we don't know those stats, or at least I don't.
So how often is there a specific play on the court, and how often are they just winging it? A listener asks.
Good question. Well, so since these are basketball questions and not NBA questions, in youth ball, in high school ball, and most of the time college ball, there is a specific play almost every possession. Now,
Because you can't trust those stupid kids.
because they're just kids, they don't know nothing. Well, there needs to be some sort of system implemented to get the best shot possible. And I think when you go younger, you go more traditional with the way ball is played. And the traditional way ball is played is getting the best shot possible. And that is usually somewhere around the basket.
Well, every level you're trying to get the best shot possible.
You're right.
Depending on what level it is,
I think what I'm trying to say
changes that shot.
Well, yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is the best shot possible for that level, at least high school down, is the one that's closest to the basket. But I haven't been to a high school game in a while, so maybe not. But most of the time, there is a specific play, because even if the best shot is a three-pointer, the easiest, most efficient way to do it for a younger league is to run a play. Now, those who have made it to professional ball are not only good enough, athletic enough, and skilled enough to make it to that level, but a lot of them are smart enough to be able to wing it. And winging it can entail just two players running a pick and roll well.
Right.
But NBA players can fluently run a pick and roll well, especially if they've done it thousands of times. And so if you're saying a pick and roll is winging it, then in the NBA, there's a lot of winging it.
Right. Yeah, I think what you just said kind of makes this a sort of a difficult question to answer, because a pick and roll is a play. It's just not a play that was called out from the sideline or from the point guard at the beginning of the possession. Every time NBA players improvise, they're doing it based on things that they've learned about basketball before. Just like, if you're playing music with your buddies, you're not going to try to figure out what notes to play on the guitar willy-nilly out of nothing. You know your scales,
Yep,
right?
Good point.
It's exactly the same in basketball. Now, if the question is on what percentage of possessions do teams call out a play and then run it, I would say that probably happens, I'm not sure, but maybe 2 times out of 3, maybe 3 times out of 4. And I think that it probably happens every time that they bring the ball up into the half court without there being a fast break. So a fast break obviously is you get a rebound and you have an advantage that is vanishing with every microsecond, and you need to get the ball down the court before the defense is able to get down there so you can get an easy basket.
Right.
But if the defense is already down the court, you don't have an advantage, you're just going to dribble the ball up and initiate half-court offense, and when you do that, you call a play.
Right. The pace dictates what will happen there. When there's stoppage of play, so after a timeout or a dead ball, there might be a contested inbounds play, and so something needs to be drawn up. And so I would say if the coach knows there's going to be an inbounds play and it'll be tightly contested almost 100% of the time, that is a drawn up play.
If they're inbounding the ball, there's a play for it.
Yes.
Or if they're inbounding the ball in the half court, there's a play for it. And I'll just throw this in as well. When they call a play and they run it and it doesn't work, that happens a lot. You got 24 seconds of the shot clock. You run a play. Maybe it takes you 8-10 seconds and the defense stops it. Well, then you have to improvise.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes there are possessions where both things happen. And I'm going to call a play right now. I'm going to say that's the last stop on the bus today.
Good call.
You can follow us on Twitter at Thunder_Bus_pod, and you can find us on all the major podcast apps. Thanks for riding the bus this week, and Thunder up.